Rain tapped lightly against the broken windows the night I arrived at the old Marlowe house. From the road it looked ordinary enough, the kind of place people pass without a second glance, but standing in front of it felt different. The porch boards groaned like they were reacting to my breath. The air tasted stale, as if the place had been holding it for years and finally let it go the moment I stepped inside. Dust floated through the faint beam of my flashlight, drifting slowly, almost thoughtfully. The walls were lined with old portraits, their faces blurred by time, yet their eyes seemed clear. Watching. Measuring. I told myself it was nerves. A long drive. A tired mind. Nothing more. But when I closed the door behind me, it didn't sound like wood meeting wood. It sounded final. Like something quietly clicking into place. Something that had been waiting. And for the first time, I wondered why no one ever talked about the people who used to live here. Or why they never talked about leaving. The discovery of the old journal begins almost by accident, during a moment when the protagonist is trying to settle their nerves by exploring the house room by room. The house feels heavier than expected, as if the air is thicker, and wandering through its halls is the only way to stay grounded. In one of the smaller bedrooms, a loose floorboard creaks under their weight, sharp and uneven compared to the usual groan of an old structure. Curiosity pushes them to kneel and press their fingers along the edge. The board lifts with surprising ease, revealing a shallow space meant to hide something rather than store it. Inside lies a journal wrapped in a piece of cloth that used to be blue but has faded into something pale and fragile. The journal smells like dust trapped for a lifetime. Its leather cover is cracked, the corners curling inward as if resisting contact. When the protagonist opens it, the pages feel delicate, almost brittle, but the handwriting inside is firm, dark, and urgent. The entries begin innocently enough, describing renovations, strange noises, and sleepless nights. Nothing too unusual for an old property. But as the pages progress, the writing changes. The lines grow tighter, the sentences shorter. The writer describes the house as if it is alive, not in a poetic sense but in a literal one. Rooms shift. Doors appear where walls used to be. Furniture moves an inch or two every night. The writer notes each change carefully, believing they are losing either their mind or their sense of direction. The most unsettling entries come later. The writer describes walking down the hallway and realizing it is longer than it was hours before. They return to the same corner and discover the window they remember is no longer there. The writer draws crude sketches of floor plans that change from page to page. At first, the shifts are small, easy to dismiss. But the final sketches show a place entirely different from the house standing above it now. Narrow corridors twist into each other. Rooms overlap. Staircases lead to blank walls. There is no logic, only movement. The protagonist feels a slow dread as they read the final entry, where the writer claims the house rearranges itself when it wants something. The handwriting is almost frantic at this point, the ink smudged as if written with shaking hands. The writer insists they hear the house settling not because of age, but because it is thinking, choosing, preparing. Holding the journal in that dim bedroom, the protagonist senses the walls around them grow quieter, as though listening. The locked room upstairs becomes a quiet fixation long before anything actually happens. On the first night, the protagonist notices it only because the doorknob doesn't rattle like the others. Every door in the house has some looseness, some aging in its hinges, but this one feels firm and deliberate, as if someone went out of their way to keep it sealed. There's a faint discoloration around the frame, not from dirt but from repeated touch, like fingers brushing the wood again and again over many years. The protagonist tells themselves it's normal for old houses to have one stubborn room and moves on, but the image of that still doorknob keeps resurfacing in their mind. As night falls, the house grows quieter in a way that feels unnatural. The usual size of wood, the shifting of old pipes, even the wind slipping through cracked windows seem to fade until the air becomes too silent. It's in that thick stillness that the protagonist hears the first sound from behind the locked door, not a footstep, not a voice, but a soft, sliding thud. It's the kind of noise heavy fabric makes when it brushes against a wall or a piece of furniture. The protagonist freezes in the hallway, holding their breath, waiting for it to repeat, but the sound doesn't come again. They blame fatigue and try to sleep, though the memory of that muffled movement settles in the back of their mind like a weight. The following day brings more clues. In the hallway, dust coats the floor, except for a faint trail leading to the locked door. It's subtle, almost invisible unless someone looks closely, but it's enough to suggest that the space behind the door isn't as untouched as it appears. A small draft seems to leak out from under the door as well, carrying with it a smell that isn't rot or mold but something faintly metallic, like old keys or coins held too long in a closed hand. The protagonist kneels, pressing their ear against the wood, but hears nothing. It isn't until the second night that the truth becomes harder to ignore. Around 3 in the morning, a soft click echoes through the hallway. The protagonist sits up instantly, recognizing the sound. A lock turning. They step into the hall with cautious steps, heart pounding, and see the door standing slightly ajar. The room beyond is completely dark. Pushing the door open reveals blankets that look recently disturbed, indentations on the floor where someone's feet might have been, and the faint warmth of a space that had been occupied not long before. The protagonist realizes the locked room wasn't abandoned. It was inhabited, and whoever stayed there didn't leave by choice. The footsteps begin as the kind of faint noise anyone could mistake for their own. The protagonist is walking down the hallway one evening, trying to shake off the unease that has settled over the house since the discovery of the unlocked room. Their footsteps echo softly on the old wooden boards, each one familiar and predictable. But then a second rhythm slips in a fraction of a beat later. It's subtle at first, almost identical, almost harmless, and for a moment they assume they misheard. They stop walking. The house falls silent. They start again. So do the footsteps. At first there's a practical explanation. Maybe it's an echo bouncing strangely through the narrow hallway. Maybe the structure has shifted over the years, creating odd acoustics. But the sound grows clearer the longer it continues. The footsteps don't trail behind or ahead of the protagonist. They match them exactly, as though someone is walking just close enough to mimic the movement but far enough to stay unseen. The timing is too perfect. The weight of the steps is too real. The boards beneath their feet groan with each press, but so do the boards behind them, following the pressure with uncanny accuracy. The protagonist tests it. They change their pace. The steps change too. They pause. Silence. They take a single, quiet step. One follows. They can feel the hairs rise along the back of their neck, the sensation of being observed tightening their spine. They turn around quickly, expecting to see the shadow of a person or the outline of something hiding in the dim light, but the hallway is empty. The air feels colder behind them, as if someone had been standing there only a breath ago. Over the next few hours, the footsteps become bolder. They start appearing in different parts of the house whenever the protagonist moves, as if the place is learning their habits and timing. Sometimes the steps seem to come from the room they just left, as though something is following but refusing to be caught in the open. Other times it sounds like the steps are coming from directly above them, mirroring their pace across the ceiling with perfect precision. It stops being an echo. It becomes intentional. The most unsettling moment happens near the staircase. The protagonist begins to descend, and the footsteps accompany them, perfectly paired. Halfway down, the sound hesitates. The steps stop, while the protagonist continues moving. For a moment, the silence feels heavy, almost disappointed. Then, one slow step echoes from the landing above, as if the unseen follower has decided to wait. The protagonist realizes the footsteps weren't copying out of some mindless habit. They were studying them. Learning them. And now, whatever is doing the copying no longer needs to stay hidden. The hallway where the hidden door is found isn't remarkable at first glance. It's narrow, dim, and lined with peeling wallpaper that curls at the edges like dried leaves. The protagonist walks through it several times over the course of their stay, never sensing anything unusual except a vague heaviness in the air. But one night, after following another round of those mimicking footsteps, they retreat to this hallway to catch their breath. Their flashlight shakes slightly in their hand, the beam casting uneven shadows across the walls. That's when they notice the wardrobe. It's tall and bulky, with a warped frame and chipped paint that suggests it was moved here long ago and never touched again. It doesn't match the rest of the furniture in the house, which is all old but practical. This piece looks wrong, like it was placed there to block something rather than to store anything. The protagonist steps closer and sees faint scratch marks around the base, shallow and scattered, as if someone had pushed it across the floor many times but always stopped in the same place. The wardrobe itself smells odd. Not of mothballs or dust, but of stale air, like the inside of a sealed room. They grip the side of the wardrobe and pull. It doesn't budge at first, but after a few firm attempts, it slides an inch. Then another. The sound it makes is deep and dragging, the kind of noise that reverberates through the floor. When the wardrobe finally shifts enough, a thin vertical line appears on the wall behind it. Not a shadow. A seam. The faint outline of a door. The door has no handle. No hinges. It's flush with the wall, its surface nearly the same color as the wallpaper, but the outline is unmistakable. The protagonist presses their fingertips to the seam, and the panel gives slightly, as if it isn't locked but simply resisting. A slow push makes it open a few inches, releasing a cold draft that smells like untouched stone and damp earth. The darkness beyond is thick, as if no light has touched it in years. The protagonist widens the opening, revealing a narrow hallway descending into the unknown. The walls inside are unfinished wood, rough and splintered, completely different from the house's upper rooms. The floor is coated in a thin layer of dust disturbed only by one clear trail of footprints leading inward. Not fresh, but not old enough to be forgotten. The path curves out of sight, twisting away from the layout the protagonist knows. They stand in the opening, realizing this passage doesn't match the floor plan of the house at all. It extends into a space that should not exist. A space someone once used. A space someone may still be using. The house hasn't just been shifting its rooms. It has been hiding them. The realization begins slowly, woven through small moments the protagonist tries to ignore. At first it feels like simple forgetfulness. They walk downstairs to fetch a glass of water and pause halfway, unable to remember whether the kitchen should be to the left or the right. It's late, they're tired, and the house has been wearing down their nerves. They chalk it up to stress and force themselves to retrace their steps. But when they finally find the kitchen, something feels off. The window above the sink is on the wrong wall. The peeling paint near the pantry wasn't there yesterday. The room is the same, yet not the same. They decide they must be remembering it wrong. As the days pass, the confusion grows sharper. The path back to the bedroom becomes unfamiliar, even though they've walked it countless times. What used to be a straight hallway now feels subtly curved. A light fixture they clearly recall is no longer there. At first, each change is small enough to dismiss, but they begin stacking up like quiet warnings. The protagonist tries marking the walls with scratches so they can tell when something moves, but the marks disappear after a few hours, either painted over or consumed by the shifting wood. They try taking notes, drawing simple maps, noting turns and door placements, yet when they look at the sketches later, none of them match the house they stand in anymore. Then comes the moment when they reach the front door and place their hand on the knob, desperate to step outside and breathe air that doesn't feel filtered through something unseen. But the knob doesn't feel familiar. It's colder. Smoother. And when they pull the door open, the porch is different. The steps are arranged differently. The angle of the railing has changed. The trees beyond seem farther away. The world outside feels wrong, and they hesitate, suddenly unsure whether stepping through will lead to safety or into something the house created to keep them occupied. The truth settles in quietly but firmly. The house isn't keeping them trapped by locking doors or blocking exits. It doesn't need to. It simply rearranges itself until the protagonist's memory becomes unreliable. It shifts hallways, swaps rooms, and alters details so gradually that navigating becomes impossible. Each attempt to memorize a route fades, replaced by confusion so subtle it feels like a personal failing rather than an external force. The protagonist realizes the house has been studying them, learning the limits of their attention and using those limits to shape their sense of direction. It isn't forcing them to stay. It's dismantling their ability to leave by taking away the one thing they rely on most without ever noticing, the certainty of remembering the way out. Night settles over the house with a heaviness that feels deliberate. The protagonist moves quietly through the shifting rooms, carrying only a dim flashlight and the journal that started everything. They know the house has been changing again. The wallpaper patterns don't match their last memory, and the floorboards beneath their feet have a different rhythm. Still, they keep going. There's no point trying to rest. Sleep only makes it harder to remember what's real. At the end of a narrow hallway, they find the hidden door again, the one behind the wardrobe. It's already open this time, as if the house expected them. A cold draft creeps out from the darkness below. The journal's pages flutter in their hand, stirred by a wind that doesn't belong indoors. The protagonist steps inside, following the same trail of footprints they saw before. Now, they realize, the prints are fresher. Someone else has walked this path recently. Or something. The hallway twists sharply, leading to a larger chamber lit only by a faint glow from cracks in the ceiling. Old furniture sits along the walls, arranged in a half-circle, facing what looks like a doorway carved into the far end. It feels ancient, part of a structure older than the house above it. The protagonist's throat tightens. They've never seen this room before, yet something in them recognizes it, as if it has been waiting for them. Behind them, footsteps echo. Slow. Familiar. Perfectly timed. The house copies their breath, their stance, their heartbeat. They turn, shining the flashlight back toward the hallway, but the beam hits only empty space. The footsteps continue anyway. Each one closer than the last. The protagonist backs toward the carved doorway, trying to keep their breathing steady. A faint whisper rises from the chamber walls, not a voice but the sound of shifting wood and moving air. The house isn't speaking. It's thinking. Choosing. Rearranging. Then the door behind the protagonist opens on its own, with no sound at all. Inside is a staircase leading up, lit by a soft, warm glow. It looks like an exit. It looks like hope. It looks like everything they've been desperate for. Their body wants to run toward it, but their mind hesitates. The house has shown them escapes before. None were real. The footsteps stop right behind them. They turn to look, but all the light in the chamber flickers out at once, swallowed by darkness that feels thick enough to touch. The journal slips from their hand. They reach for the wall, trying to feel their way back, but the surfaces keep shifting beneath their palms. A whisper curls around their ear, soft and patient, like the house is finally speaking after all this time. The staircase vanishes. So does the doorway. All that remains is the darkness and the slow understanding that they are no longer lost inside the house. They are part of it now.